everyone, and welcome to another mini-sode of the investigation game. I'm here with Leah.
Hello.
And we are not in Leah's house. Well, she's in hers, but I'm in mine. And real quick, I do want to specify that we promise to maintain the 10-minute minimum or maximum this week.
That is correct.
Unlike last time. So for that reason, we are just going to dive into it. You ready with the timer?
Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Go.
So my question for today is in regards to your interview with Kara Vincent. I was curious as to how you data sleuth in an estate.
Yeah, so data sleuthing in an estate really could just involve looking at the bank statements every month. So this will kind of help you do a couple of things. If you're looking at the bank statement every month, you can see if maybe a caregiver or if maybe a trustee or even just someone maybe scamming through like the lottery calls and stuff, because their targets a lot of times are seniors. And so you can, if you just look at the bank statements every month, you can kind of just see if there are weird things going on. Like if, let's say the senior is still living and there are 2 house payments being made out of the bank account, right? Like that's something you might want to look into, or multiple utilities bills. It might make sense. Maybe they have a couple different buildings on their property, but then maybe they're paying somebody's utility bills. Those are really, really common. So one of the things that we do, and we actually use something called Money Thumb, and we'll put the link in the show notes, but we use something called Money Thumb where you can import your bank statements to Excel, and then you can just filter for different things. And so on our YouTube channel, Rachel has some examples of looking for even dollar payments and also just some filtering and sorting tools. And so I just recommend going in, looking for even dollar payments within the bank account, because a lot of times that'll show you, some of it might be explained. Maybe they're paying, maybe they're having to pay an attorney for something, or, professional fees a lot of times end in those even dollar payments. And by even dollar payments, I mean $1,000, $5,000, $1,500, looking for things that doesn't have change. And it's not like $1,543. Like that's kind of weird. A lot of times it's just nice, even round numbers. So that's really, if anybody asks me about that, that's where I would start. And we had kind of talked before about addressing, like, how do you know if somebody's high risk of somebody, stealing money or whatever. And in an estate, I always consider who has access to the bank accounts. And, Kara talks about how families have years and years and years of like baggage, right? And so maybe there's someone in the family who's always been the baby, who couldn't keep a job, who couldn't handle their money, who had a lot of debt and dad always had to bail them out. Like there's lots of those situations that if that person is put in charge of the estate or of the trust, or is the caregiver, because a lot of times that person become, like Kara talked about, it's that person that ends up moving in with mom or dad because they don't necessarily have a house. So they move in, I'm going to take care of mom and dad, and then they get access to all of their financial records, and then they start spending that money. So to evaluate if there's risk there is to consider, and this might sound a little judgy, but it's just some facts, it's just some data, right? But just consider, who is this person that has access to this information, to the financial accounts, and are they employed? Do they constantly need money? Do they constantly need to be bailed out? Now, that's not to say that somebody who doesn't have all of those things wouldn't steal, but it's a risk. And I'm not saying because someone is a high risk, they will steal, but the way that you catch it is just by looking at those bank statements. So if your maybe brother moves in with mom and is going to take care of mom, but then sister is also on the bank account. Sister needs to make sure that she has online access or gets copies of those bank statements every month so that she can see what's going on and just step in and talk to mom about it. I mean, kind of what I loved Kara's recommendations on the podcast last week that like have these conversations early and kind of negate some of the just risk and really kind of divisiveness that can move forward in these situations.
So that kind of raises another question for me. So in these kinds of situations where it's parents kind of being financially abused by their children, whose responsibility is it to kind of look out for people who are in this situation, or is there anybody that they just have to do it themselves before it gets to that point?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, there's no one that like regulates it, to like check in. There's no auditor that's going to come in and do that on a regular basis for someone. So it's really up to the family unit to set up kind of their own version of internal controls. But like Kara said, a lot of people don't want to have that conversation before mom and dad pass away, or especially they're towards the end. And then what do you do after the fact? And then you get into this whole like, well, did they intend for Bobby to get all this extra money? And then how much am I going to spend to try to get Bobby's part back? Kara talks about that too. So all of those things just kind of make for this a sticky situation. And so that's why just if you're going to date a sleuth in an estate and you're concerned about your family's money, find a way, especially if you can do it before your parent passes away, like just make it, I don't know, it might even be a good option just to add every kid as like they could maybe not spend the money and they're not a signer, but like they could have online access just to read only, just see the transactions. Like that might be a thought. I never had that thought before, but just a way so that everybody kind of knows. But then at the same time, mom or dad might feel like you're nitpicking how I'm spending my money. So all of this is a little tricky, but these are just these are the most common ways that we find that children are either taking more of their fair share of the estate after mom and dad have passed away, or maybe abusing their relationship while mom and dad are living.
I see. So at Workman Forensics, do you run into these kinds of cases often?
Yes. We actually work a lot of estate. It's kind of like divorce, estate and trust, and embezzlements are like our top 3 areas. And all of them, to some extent, require the same data sleuthing process. So if you think, wait, but in an embezzlement, you told us to look for even dollar payments, right? You also look for even dollar payments here. You also look for even dollar payments, in a divorce case, like all of these things that we typically look for in the types of transactions, we're going to look for it in estates as well.
Okay, so with all the estate cases, do you notice kind of the most common situations? Is it usually the children? Is it usually like a neighbor, or usually a caregiver? Like what's kind of the most common situation? I don't know if that's...
I think it's been a mixture of all of it. And actually in our next podcast, kind of a trailer for the next podcast, I actually am interviewing Jason Zirkle with the ACFE, and he worked from a law enforcement perspective. He was an analyst with law enforcement. He actually investigated an embezzlement, also a fraud of like elder financial abuse, and a murder all in one. So we're going to be talking about that next week. But to answer your question, I know, right? Oh, you're looking forward to editing that one, right? But like all of those, so it's just, I've had trustees, I've had the caregivers, I've had children, all types. I don't know that there's anything that's most common.
Do they all steal the same way, or it kind of depends on the situation?
I would say most of the time it's the same way. Yeah. That's why we can, every case has some nuances, and it kind of depends on what the assets were. as to how we're gonna handle it. But most of the time, the majority of the issues that we find are from looking at those bank statements and identifying strange transactions. That captures the majority of the issues.
I see. Well, that was all the questions I had for this week. Is there anything else you'd like to add about?
No, and you did great because we have like 20 seconds left. So
Really? Oh, well.
So they don't get to hear the timer go off this week. Oh, darn.
Well, thank you, Leah, for talking with me.
Of course, always.
The Investigation Game is brought to you by Workman Forensics. For more information on the business and its services, visit workmanforensics.com. Find us on social media on any social media platform at Workman Forensics. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or topic ideas, please email us at podcast@workmanforensics.com. Thanks for listening.